very eloquently and visually sold both themselves and their topics so accurately, and I hope I don't need to encourage you to support further, but I'm going to.
Princess Anne has been working incredibly hard to save the children from me. I'm her biggest fan, because what she crams into a day I could never achieve. And we've always hit it off very well. And I just think she's...
She has been called the hardest working royal in the history of the British monarchy. Tough, uncompromising, unapologetic. A woman who has never once shied away from saying exactly what she thinks. And yet, for nearly 3 decades, there has been one subject Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, has refused to fully confront in public: Princess Diana. For 27 years, the world has mourned the loss of the people's princess, a woman whose warmth, vulnerability, and radical humanity changed the face of the British royal family forever. But while the world wept openly, one person sat in silence, carrying a weight that very few people ever truly understood. And that person was Princess Anne. Now, through a series of rare interviews, insider royal accounts, and startling revelations that have slowly emerged over more than 2 decades, we are finally beginning to piece together the truth of what happened between these 2 extraordinary women. And more importantly, what Princess Anne has finally, painstakingly, revealed about the things she wished she had said. The conversations that never happened, the moments that were never repaired, and one haunting reality that Anne has never fully been able to escape. She believes she failed Diana. So stay with us, because what you are about to hear is not just a story about 2 women who didn't get along. It is a story about silence, regret, and what happens when pride costs you the chance to say the most important words of all. The 2 princesses, a world apart. To understand the magnitude of Anne's grief and regret, you first need to understand just how different these 2 women were, and how that difference shaped nearly every interaction they ever had. When Diana Spencer stepped into the British royal family in 1981 as the 19-year-old fiancée of Prince Charles, she walked into a world that had been dominated for years by one formidable woman, Princess Anne. Anne was 31 at the time, already a celebrated Olympic equestrian, a mother of 2, and one of the most respected working royals in the country. She had none of Diana's softness, none of her tearful vulnerability. Where Diana wore her heart like a badge, Anne kept hers locked in an iron box. And the very first meeting between them, the very first time Diana attempted to bridge the gap, told you everything you needed to know about the years ahead. According to royal author Ingrid Seward, writing in her book Prince Edward, when a young Diana first encountered Anne, she greeted her with an elaborate curtsy, a gesture of extraordinary deference that she clearly hoped would win Anne's favor. It did the opposite. Anne, known for her no-nonsense disposition and fierce disregard for what she considered performative behavior, was unimpressed. Her reaction was so cutting, so dismissive, that Diana, the future Princess of Wales adored by millions, reportedly fled the room. Let that sink in for a moment. The woman who would go on to shake hands with AIDS patients when no one else dared. The woman who would walk through live minefields in Angola. The woman who fearlessly faced down the most powerful media machine in the world. That woman was so shaken by one look from Princess Anne that she ran. Think about what that tells you. Not about Diana's weakness, but about the sheer, concentrated force of Anne's presence. And that dynamic, that fundamental imbalance, never truly changed. There was also an 11-year age gap between them, and the 2 women were at entirely different life stages when Diana joined the family. Anne had already carved out her identity within the institution. Diana was still discovering hers, and doing so in the most public, most scrutinized, most chaotic way possible. Royal insiders say that Anne struggled to understand Diana. Where Anne valued discipline, Diana brought drama. Where Anne preferred action over words, Diana gave speeches that moved entire nations to tears. Where Anne brushed off the press with terse, clipped dismissals, Diana used the media like a weapon, and used it brilliantly. One source reportedly recalled Anne sighing to friends that, wherever she goes, drama follows. It was not said with warmth, and behind the palace walls, the gulf between them only deepened. The slights that couldn't be undone. Now here is where things become particularly painful, because the story of Anne and Diana's estrangement wasn't built on one dramatic explosion. It was built on a series of quiet, accumulating wounds. Moments that, taken individually, might seem trivial, but stacked together, over years, they became a wall neither woman was willing to climb over. And one of the most significant of those moments involved a christening. When Prince William was born in 1982, Princess Anne fully expected to be named as one of his godparents. It was, by any measure, a reasonable expectation. Anne was Charles's only sister. Charles, after all, was the godfather to Anne's son, Peter Phillips. Royal protocol and simple family loyalty seemed to dictate that the honor would be reciprocated. It wasn't. Anne was passed over entirely, but Charles reportedly assured her there would be a next time. 2 years later, Prince Harry was born in 1984. Anne waited and was overlooked again. This time, Prince Andrew was named as Harry's godfather, and Diana's justification, that she simply preferred a male godparent for a male child, didn't hold up, given that Harry also had 6 additional godparents of mixed genders, including Princess Margaret's daughter. Royal sources say Anne was furious, not in a tearful, confrontational way, that wasn't her style, but the kind of cold, steely fury that Anne was legendary for. She didn't attend Prince Harry's christening at all, citing prior commitments to a hunting party at her Gloucestershire estate. A statement, clear as a bell. And after that, according to a separate royal source, Anne very rarely made an effort to speak to Diana at family functions. She had, as far as she was concerned, been snubbed twice, and she was not the type to pretend otherwise. Now, here is the question I want you to pause on for a moment. Do you think Diana made those decisions alone? Or do you think the young, increasingly isolated Princess of Wales was receiving guidance? And if so, from whom? Because here's what the history books tell us. Diana, in those early years, was desperately lonely inside the palace. Charles was distant. The Queen was formidable. The institution was rigid. And Anne, the one woman with enough experience, enough strength, and enough seniority to have truly helped Diana find her footing, kept her at arm's length. It's not really Diana's fault that Anne never took to her, one insider later revealed. Diana was intimidated by her, and Charles never made much of an effort to help his new wife bond with his sister. That detail is devastating when you really sit with it. Charles, who would himself later describe his marriage as a mistake almost from the beginning, never took the time to help the woman he was supposed to love build a bridge with the one female member of his family who might have made a real difference. Anne didn't reach out, Charles didn't help, and Diana, surrounded by millions of adoring strangers and profoundly alone within her own family, navigated it all herself. The world was watching, and Anne was watching too. Now let's talk about the moment that fractured the royal family in a way it had never experienced before, and the moment that, in many ways, deepened the distance between Anne and Diana to its furthest point. November 20th, 1995. An estimated 200 million people around the world settled in front of their televisions to watch Diana, Princess of Wales, sit across from BBC journalist Martin Bashir and tell her truth. All of it. She spoke about her eating disorders, about depression, about what it felt like to be excluded from the institution she had dedicated her life to. She described Camilla Parker Bowles's role in her marriage with those unforgettable words. "There were 3 of us in this marriage. It was breathtaking. It was unprecedented. And for many, many people, it was the moment Diana became more than a princess. She became a symbol of every person who had ever been trapped, gaslit, silenced, and had finally found the courage to speak. But inside the palace walls, the reaction was seismic, and not in a good way. Royal insiders say that Princess Anne was very disgruntled by Diana going on air and speaking about her depression, her isolation, and how awful it was to be part of the family. Anne, who had dedicated her entire adult life to the institution, who had never complained publicly, never aired her private pain, reportedly viewed Diana's decision as a betrayal of everything the royal family stood for. And the Queen agreed. Shortly after the interview, Queen Elizabeth II urged Charles and Diana to finally divorce, accelerating the formal end of their marriage. For Anne, it reinforced a long-held belief. Diana chose the dramatic path every time. But here is something Anne didn't know in 1995, something none of them knew for 26 years. Diana didn't make that choice freely. In 2021, a landmark investigation led by Supreme Court Judge Lord Dyson concluded that journalist Martin Bashir had used deliberately deceitful methods to secure the interview. He had forged bank statements. He had fed Diana fabricated rumors about people close to her. He had exploited a woman who, by the accounts of multiple people around her, was in a profoundly vulnerable state. Diana never knew the full extent of Bashir's manipulation before she died. And in the years after the Dyson report, as that truth settled, something shifted in Princess Anne. The royal insider who had long told themselves that Diana courted controversy, that she sought the spotlight, craved the drama, now had to reckon with a harder reality. Diana had been deceived, isolated, manipulated, and not a single person inside that palace had reached out to protect her. One source close to Anne revealed that after the truth about Bashir emerged, Anne's regret deepened. The same sharp, brilliant woman who had dismissed Diana's drama for years had to sit quietly and consider what might have been different if only one person had made a different choice. The summer that changed everything. Now let's take you to the summer of 1997, because this is where the story moves beyond complicated to genuinely heartbreaking. Diana's final year had been, by any measure, extraordinary. In January 1997, she had walked through a live minefield in Angola, a staggering act of bravery that brought global attention to the campaign for a landmine ban. She had met Nelson Mandela in South Africa. She had auctioned off her iconic gowns for charity. She had visited her mentor, Mother Teresa, who, in one of history's most devastating coincidences, would die just days after Diana herself. And just 10 days before her death, Diana was in Greece with her closest friend, Rosa Monckton, on what would become their final holiday together. According to Monckton, it was during that trip that Diana confided something quietly devastating. The two women talked about the 1995 Panorama interview, and Diana told Monckton she regretted doing it because of the harm she thought it had done to her boys. Her boys. Always, always, her boys. Diana's overriding concern in those final days, according to people who were close to her, was William and Harry, then 15 and 12 years old enough to understand, young enough to be permanently shaped by everything that was happening around them. She was already carrying the weight of believing she had hurt them, and she was about to return to Paris, where a chaotic, paparazzi-chased night would end in that tunnel. She never got the chance to have that conversation with William and Harry. She never got to say what she needed to say. Now, here is where I need to ask you something directly. We talk a lot about what Diana didn't get to say, about the conversations she never had with her sons. But what about the conversation she never had with Princess Anne? Because the truth that has slowly, painfully emerged through royal sources, insider accounts, and Anne's own rare, guarded public statements, is that Diana had been reaching, in her own way, for a connection with Anne that never fully came. Royal experts noted that despite their difficult dynamic, Diana went out of her way in public to speak warmly of her sister-in-law. In a 1985 interview, when pressed directly about the feud rumors, Diana refused to engage. Instead, she spoke about Anne's work for Save the Children with genuine admiration. Anne has been working incredibly hard, and I'm her biggest fan, because what she crams into a day, I could never achieve. Her biggest fan. She called Anne her biggest fan. And what did Anne say that same year? She called the feud allegations fairy stories and moved on. Not a word of reciprocal warmth, not one gesture of sisterhood toward the young woman who was, by that point, clearly struggling. The night the world fell apart. August 31st, 1997. Shortly after midnight, a black Mercedes S280 entered the Pont de l'Alma underpass in Paris. In the car were Diana, her companion Dodi Fayed, driver Henry Paul, and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones. The car had been pursued through the streets of Paris by photographers for hours. Henry Paul lost control. The car struck the concrete central pillar of the tunnel at high speed. Dodi Fayed and Henry Paul died at the scene. Diana was pulled from the wreckage alive, but gravely injured. She was rushed to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital. At 4 a.m. Paris time, on August 31st, 1997, Princess Diana was pronounced dead at the age of 36. Across England, people began to wake to the news. Some heard it on the radio, others were called by family members. Slowly, disbelievingly, a nation began to absorb a reality it refused to accept. And at Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands, the royal family, including the Queen, Prince Charles, and the young princes William and Harry, received the news in private. Princess Anne received the news too, and by every credible account that has since emerged, from people inside the palace, from royal sources who knew her, Anne was, in the words of one insider, speechless with shock and great sadness. Speechless. Princess Anne. The woman who was never at a loss for words. The woman who had once turned to a journalist who asked her a question about Diana and responded with withering cool, "I don't know. You tell me." That woman, brilliant, guarded, armor-plated Anne, was speechless. Anne's not one for shows of emotion. She's like her mother in that way, one source revealed. But Diana's death really got to her. Deep down, she did regret not making more of an effort with her. And that is where the haunting begins. Because what Anne has slowly, quietly, painfully revealed in the years since, through her own rare interviews, through sources close to the palace, through what is spoken and what is conspicuously, deliberately unspoken, tells us something extraordinary about what was left unsaid between these two women, what Anne revealed, and what it cost her. In 2017, 20 years after Diana's death, ITV News filmed a rare interview with Princess Anne. For reasons that remain somewhat mysterious, significant portions of that interview were not broadcast at the time. It was only in 2022, following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, that the footage resurfaced and became one of the most talked-about pieces of royal video in years. In that interview, Anne spoke about the Queen's decision to remain at Balmoral Castle with young William and Harry in the immediate aftermath of Diana's death, a decision that was widely criticized by a grieving public who wanted the monarch in London visibly mourning with them. And what Anne said in defense of her mother's choice reveals something profound about how this family processes pain, and perhaps explains, more than anything else, why Anne and Diana were never able to reach each other. Anne said, "I just don't know how you could think that returning to London would have been a better thing to do. I don't think either of those two would have been able to cope if they'd been anywhere else. That was the only good thing that happened, that they were there, And they had that structure. They had people around them who could understand, give them the time, little time that they had, which was never going to be very much, to try and come, even in a fleeting sense, to terms with what had happened. Structure. That word again. The same word that defines everything about how Anne understood the world. For Anne, structure was protection. The institution wasn't a cage, it was a shield. And the Queen's choice to keep William and Harry in Balmoral, away from the cameras, away from the howling public grief, was, in Anne's view, an act of profound maternal love. But here is the devastating irony that Anne herself seems to have come to understand only after it was too late. Diana never had that structure. Diana was never given that shield. The institution that Anne loved and trusted, that had shaped her, defined her, protected her, had for Diana been a source of isolation and pain from the very beginning. And rather than recognizing that Diana's emotional openness, her need for connection, her inability to conform, was not weakness, but difference, the royal family, including Anne, had simply turned away. And in turning away, they had left Diana to face the most predatory media machine in history almost entirely alone. Here is where we come to the words that, more than any others, capture the truth of what Princess Anne has revealed in the years since Diana's death. According to a source close to Anne, speaking to royal reporters, she genuinely worries, that she failed Diana. She worries that she failed Diana, who could have used a strong woman to support her, the source revealed. A source says Anne is very hard on herself over her could have, should have, would have feelings on Diana. Could have, should have, would have. 3 phrases, 3 words each. And together, they represent something that Princess Anne, titanium-spined, indestructible Princess Anne, has carried with her every single day for nearly 3 decades. The unspoken words. What Diana wanted from Anne. Now let's do something that I think is genuinely important. Let's talk about what Diana actually wanted from Anne. Because this story is not just about Anne's regret. It's about Diana's quiet, persistent, ultimately unsuccessful attempt to build something real with her sister-in-law. Think back to everything we know about Diana's years inside the palace. The young woman who arrived as a 19-year-old bride, terrified of the Queen, overlooked by Charles, and navigating one of the most scrutinized, most hostile environments in the world. Who were her allies? Truly? She had Paul Burrell, her devoted butler, a handful of close friends, her sister Sarah. Eventually, her charitable work, which gave her purpose and identity that the palace never could. But inside the family, inside the Windsor institution itself, Diana was, at every critical moment, isolated. And Princess Anne, the one woman in that family with enough independence, enough authority, enough genuine strength to have stood beside Diana and said, "I see you, and you are not alone," never did. One insider, quoted in the detailed account of their relationship, put it plainly. Diana was intimidated by her, and Charles never made much of an effort to help his new wife bond with his sister. But consider this. Despite the coldness, despite the snubs, despite the years of distance, Diana never stopped speaking warmly of Anne in public. She called her her biggest fan. She praised her work. She dismissed rumors of a feud. Was that diplomacy? Possibly. Was it the carefully managed public persona of a woman who understood that showing fractures in the family wall would only invite more attack? Almost certainly. But could it also have been something else? Could it have been hope? Because there is something in Diana's consistent refusal to publicly attack Anne, even as other relationships deteriorated, even as the war with Charles became openly declared, that suggests she never entirely gave up on the possibility of something better. She just never got the chance to find out. Anne after Diana, a silence that speaks volumes. In the years since Diana's death, Princess Anne has continued to be, by every measurable standard, the hardest-working member of the British royal family. She undertakes hundreds of royal engagements every year, is patron of over 300 organizations, and is tireless and disciplined. Everything the institution values, and everything Diana struggled to embody. And yet, in July 2023, a clip resurfaced on social media that immediately went viral. It was archival footage from 1982, during a royal tour of the United States. A journalist called out to Anne as she walked past, "Any word about Diana?" Anne stopped, turned, and with the cool, almost theatrical precision she has always deployed as both sword and shield, replied, "Any word about Diana? I don't know. You tell me." Then she walked away. Thousands of comments followed. People debated whether it revealed hostility, humor, or the characteristic deflection of a woman who has always refused to perform emotion for public consumption. But watch it with everything you now know: the regret, the could have, should have, would have, the speechless shock that greeted Diana's death. Does it look like hostility? Or does it look like a woman who had already built walls so high around her true feelings that deflection was the only available response? Princess Anne does not do performative grief. That is not who she is. And in many ways, it is exactly the quality that made it so impossible for her to reach Diana, whose entire language was emotional transparency. Two women, fundamentally different languages, and no one who loved them both enough to translate. The weight of what was never said. What did Diana whisper to Anne in those final days? The truthful answer is that she didn't. Diana was in Paris. Anne was in England. There was no final conversation, no reconciliation, no last chance to say what needed to be said. And that is precisely the point. The most devastating revelation in this story is not a secret conversation. It is the absence of one. Two extraordinary women spent 16 years in the same family, attending the same events, sitting at the same tables, and never found a way to genuinely speak to each other. What Diana might have whispered, if she'd had the chance, that she wasn't the enemy, that the drama attributed to her was not vanity, but pain, that beneath the dazzling smile and the ability to fill a room with warmth, there was a woman who was profoundly lonely, and who would have given almost anything for one senior woman inside that family to have said, "You are not alone here." And what might Anne have whispered back? That she saw more than she showed, that somewhere beneath the armor she had recognized a kind of courage in her sister-in-law she never found a way to acknowledge, that the woman who was speechless on the morning of August 31st, 1997, had loved in the way that people who are bad at loving still love, imperfectly, silently, and too late. The legacy and the lesson. Institutions are powerful. Discipline has its place. But none of those things can substitute for the simple human act of turning to someone who is struggling and choosing to show up for them. Diana showed up for the world, for AIDS patients abandoned by their families, for children in minefields, for the grieving and the forgotten. She showed up with her whole self every time, regardless of protocol or personal cost. And the one place she never felt fully seen was inside the family she had given everything to be part of. In recent years, Princess Anne has shown signs of carrying that knowledge. After the 2021 Dyson report revealed the full extent of the deception used to secure Diana's Panorama interview, sources close to Anne noted that her regret intensified. The portrait that emerged was not the Diana Anne had constructed in her mind. It was something more complicated, more sympathetic, more human. And in 2024, following her own unexpected hospitalization, Anne told interviewers, "You are sharply reminded that every day is a bonus, really. You never quite know. Something happens, and you might not recover." Words that could have been spoken by a woman who understands what it means to lose the chance to say what she should have said. Princess Anne has not given a tearful interview about her relationship with Diana, and she almost certainly never will. But the story of what these two women were to each other is one of the most quietly devastating in modern royal history. Not because of scandals, but because of silence. Two proud women who spoke entirely different languages and never found a translator. Diana is gone. Anne is still here, still working, still carrying, if those closest to her are to be believed, the full weight of those could have, should have, would have words. And maybe that is itself a kind of tribute. The woman who never showed emotion, honoring the woman she never reached, in the only language she has ever truly known, quietly, privately, without an audience, and without end. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share this video. Leave a comment below. Do you think Anne and Diana could ever have found their way to each other given more time? Subscribe, because there are more untold stories from inside the palace walls still waiting to be told.